Satya, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Schoaf. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success here at Quorum. If you're not aware, Quorum is a public relations and government advocacy software company based here in Washington, D.C. And I head up the team that works with all of our clients to help them do things like map and track and change their policy landscape. Prior to Quorum, I worked for several different companies in the nonprofit space, specifically software to nonprofit space, and spent a great deal of my time working on advocacy campaigns. So this topic is something that I've been sort of deeply invested in over the last sort of many years. Ashley?
And I did the classic, I was on mute. So thank you so much, Andrew. Like Satya said before, it wouldn't be a webinar without some tech difficulties. So thank you so much for having me today. My name is Ashley Smith. I'm the Associate Director of Grassroots Advocacy at the ALS Association. My role is to design and direct nonpartisan grassroots activities to advance the ALS Association's policy priorities and our mission. Prior to joining the ALS Association, I led the grassroots efforts at the National League of Cities, empowering city leaders to advocate directly with federal elected officials. And then prior to that, I worked at M&R, a public affairs consulting firm, and worked with clients like the American Lung Association and the MacArthur Foundation and state and local advocacy activities. So excited to share my experiences with using social media for advocacy today with you all.
Great. So before we really get to the meat of the content, on behalf of Satya and Ashley, I really want to just take a moment to thank everyone for being here today. We certainly know that in the world that we're living in, there are a lot of extra demands placed on us, especially during the workday. And we know how hard it is for you to take time out of your day. So we really appreciate you doing that and taking the next hour to be with us. Before Ashley and I then really get into kind of the strategy that we really want to talk about today, want to take just a couple of minutes to dive into some of the data to kind of set the scene a little bit, to understand why are we talking about advocacy in social media? Do policymakers really pay attention to these things? And quite frankly, is this a place where we really think we should be spending our time? Great. And over the last 10 years, I think we've all sort of realized that social media has become fundamental to really any marketing or communication strategies. Therefore, it really shouldn't be a big surprise that the same trend really is held true for our federal legislators. As we see in the chart here, in the last year, 99% of House members and 100% of Senate members have posted on Facebook, and the same metrics hold true for Twitter. We're also seeing a rise in popularity of federal legislators using other platforms, such as Instagram or YouTube. What's really interesting here is that the change isn't just with the members themselves. Right now, there are over 170 different staffers across 90 offices working on the Hill with the words either digital or new media or social media in their job title. So the point here is that federal legislators and their offices have fully embraced the idea and usage of social media. And to me, actually what's most telling isn't that they're using social or where they're using social, it's how often they are using social media. Federal legislators are posting on average over 1,200 times a day on Twitter and over 700 times a day on Facebook. And to be clear, this does not consider the volume of tweets that might be coming from the White House. So with all of this dialogue happening from officials' accounts, it's really impossible for us to ignore social media as a primary communication channel. And Satya, if we go to the next slide, terrific. And the final data point before I hand it over to Ashley that I want to present is that it's not just the younger members of Congress that we see operating on social. Although members in their 40s tend to be the most active across all platforms, no single age group lags significantly behind those leaders. One of my favorite facts is this. One of the most active legislators on Instagram is 86-year-old Chuck Grassley. So again, social media is really being embraced by all of our federal legislators across both branches of government, or federal, the state, and or the Senate and the House, and across all age groups. So it's really become ubiquitous in our federal legislators.
And now I want to talk a little bit about the ALS Association's advocacy on social media. And as Andrew said, that the wider scene of how Congress is using social. These 4 examples show you how we're using it at the ALS Association. So in the top left hand of your screen, you'll see a social campaign for appropriations. And this is an example of a post-action social share through Quorum. Once any of our advocates take action, they have the opportunity to share our actions to their followers on social media, to their friends and to their family. And so we use social media to highlight our ongoing campaigns year after year, our appropriations campaign. Well, the numbers that we're asking for to support research for ALS and people for ALS change year to year. We always have an appropriations ask, much like many of you in your organizations. We also use social media to highlight new issues that we're working on. So in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you see a social campaign for the SMART Act. And this example is a part of our follow-up tweets for any of our issue advocacy campaigns through our Advocacy Action Center. And so we use social media to highlight these new issues that pop up throughout the year and throughout the congressional session. And it really helps to not only educate our audiences about new issues, but to also educate members of Congress about why we're asking them to take a specific action as these new issues pop up for our community. We also use social to drive action to our campaigns. Our organization has a very robust Twitter and Facebook and Instagram presence. And so we always post on social media. We would launch a new campaign to engage those audiences that have already opted in to our communications and drive action to our Advocacy Action Center. And then finally, we share meetings on social media. You'll see this example, this tweet came from our 2019 National ALS Advocacy Conference. It's a group picture with a member of Congress after they had met in person in Washington, D.C. And it was just a great example of how we're thanking members of Congress for taking time out of their busy schedules to meet with our advocates and continue to building those relationships on social media. And here are some of the results of our social media advocacy work. We've seen some great success with these campaigns, and one of the biggest metrics that we use is how the feedback we've gotten from members of Congress on social media. So on the right and the left-hand side of your screens, you see examples of congressional offices, members of Congress thanking our advocates for meeting with them. Both of these examples come from in-person meetings last year. And in the center of the screen, you'll see a constituent member example that we were really excited about that we learned through our tracking and Quorum, which was really helpful for us. At the top, one of our great ALS advocates had taken the action in support of the SMART Act and did our followed up tweet action, which was great, posted urging Rodney Davis, her congressman, to co-sponsor the SMART Act. A couple of days later, Congressman Davis and his staff thanked our advocate for bringing that bill to his attention and to looking more deeply into this issue. So it was a really great way to engage with that member of Congress. And then a couple of days later, we got a notification that the congressman did end up co-sponsoring the SMART Act. So it was a great close of that advocacy loop, our advocate taking action, as well as that member of Congress doing the thing we had asked him to do. So it was really great to see and was all trackable through Quorum.
So a quick poll for the audience. We are curious how social media is integrated into your advocacy strategy. I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll in just a moment.
And as we get that going, great. And I see it just popped up. I saw some questions come in, which is great. And actually, maybe you and I can answer those right now.
Yeah.
There was a first question about the data that I presented in terms of, does that include state data? Just to be clear, that data was just for federal legislators, so members of Congress. So great question. Sorry if there's any confusion there. And Ashley, I saw a question for you. I'm just going to go ahead and read it if that's okay.
Yep.
So for alert targeting appropriations committee, did you have that open to anyone to send an email, even if their legislator wasn't on the committee?
Yes. So that alert targeting the appropriations ask was in support of a Dear Colleague letter that we work with members of Congress to sponsor every single year in support of our ALS research appropriations ask. So that was open to everyone, but we do use targeting when needed. So if we don't want to send a co-sponsor or a vote yes request to a congressional office because they've already taken the action we want them to, we'll use the targeting in the back end of quorum to make sure that our advocates are A, receiving the emails appropriately, and B, being able to reach the members of Congress that we need to take action in support of our advocacy priorities.
Great, thank you. I did see one additional question come in sort of about rules of engagement. I think we're going to get to some of those slides a little bit later. So Julie, if we haven't answered your question a little bit later, please go ahead and just ping us again. But in terms of the response to the poll, thank you very much for responding. It's really interesting to see the kind of variety that we've got here. About a third of folks on the line have sort of a fully integrated social media component in their advocacy. Around half feel like they're somewhat integrated, and then a few other folks are not quite integrated, or they haven't really built out a grassroots advocacy function yet. So that's always just really helpful for us to see kind of who's on the line. There's always a great sort of variety of experience. So thanks very much. That's super, super helpful. Actually, if we just, Sadia, yeah, if we just want to go on. So now that we've kind of gone through sort of the why social media is valuable, Ashley and I want to spend a little more time on the how to do this properly. What are the things that we have seen work so well? What are the strategies that really allow you to move the needle in your advocacy campaigns? Great.
So first, in understanding the why of using social media as a part of your advocacy campaign is considering what goals you want to achieve with social. The same ways that you would talk about goals for any offline or online advocacy campaign, you want to talk about goals for social media. So all of your posts for social media will have one of two target audiences, either advocates or policymakers. And then certain objectives apply to each of those audiences. So when targeting your advocates, your post should be focused on either one, educating your advocates on the issues, or two, driving action from your advocates. And when targeting content to policymakers, you want to entice them, obviously, to engage on our issues and to take action in a specific way. So understanding the why, you kind of want to ask yourself two questions. Why is social, number one, a good place to engage your advocates on the issues? And really it's because they've already opted in. They're liking your Twitter account, they're following you on Facebook, they are engaging in your regular communication streams, and so your advocacy is a part of everything that your organization does. At the ALS Association, our advocacy is equally important in our mission as our care services and our research teams, and so we want to make sure that we're including the entire mix of the work that we're doing at the ALS Association on behalf of people living with ALS and their families in the mix of our communications channels. So that always includes social media. And then why is social a good place to drive action from advocates is because it's already optimized for social media. When you create an action and post about it on Facebook or post about it on Twitter, and our advocates see it come through on their news feeds, they can easily click right away and take action through our Advocacy Action Center in 1 or 2 clicks. So it's really optimized for that social environment. And it's a great way to engage them, not only to educate, but also to provide that engagement opportunity so they can make a difference in the policy priorities that we're working on behalf of their families and their community.
And there's really two primary reasons why engaging policymakers and legislators through social is a good idea. The first is that they are paying attention. If anyone's ever walked into a member's office on the Hill, one of the first things you're going to see is someone sitting behind a desk. Oftentimes it's an intern taking phone calls from constituents and recording people's emails and their positions on a variety of bills and stances. Those same people are doing the same thing in terms of recording what's being said on the internet, what's being recorded over social media. So federal legislators, policymakers are absolutely paying attention to what's being said over the internet and what their constituents are telling them directly via social media. The second reason social is sort of valuable here is because it is effectively public. If a member of Congress doesn't respond to an issue or doesn't respond to a constituent's tweet or Facebook post, or they completely ignore something that's going on in the environment, they ignore something that's trending on the internet, everyone can see that. So there's a level of accountability here that we have with social media that's actually a lot harder to track sometimes with phone calls or emails. So again, social has a really important and sort of unique opportunity to drive a slightly different engagement conversation with your policy members than a lot of your traditional channels do.
The second component of knowing when and when not to use social media for advocacy. At the ALS Association and many of my past roles, our rule of thumb is that there should be a social component to most campaigns. It's a communications channel that our communities are checking on a daily basis. I'm sure now they're checking it a little more to stay on top of news of what's going on in the pandemic, but also to connect with family and friends during this time of quarantine. So we want to meet where our advocates where they are and meet members of Congress where they are. But while it's not always a primary ask of our advocate, it's always beneficial to use, like Andrew said, that public pressure on a member of Congress, on any officials. And some examples of campaigns that should have a social component are, number one, legislative and appropriations asks. And that's because members of Congress, especially this year, because it's an election year, they'll have to reply on their stance on the issues. Their constituents will ask at town halls, on phone calls, on teletown halls like this, about their stance on issues. And those issues are a public record. Anytime a member of Congress votes or co-sponsors a bill, it's a public record. You can look it up on congress.gov. So having that public pressure, persuasion component through social media on those asks is really important. Number two, thank yous for policymaker actions. Members of Congress hear a lot of negative feedback all of the time. And so anytime that you can thank a member of Congress for either meeting with you or for taking the action that you've asked of them, it's a really important relationship builder. And we see time and time again, the offices liking our posts when we're including their tags, their handles in our posts, and really having that interaction on social media as well as in person. And then number three, fly-ins, advocacy days, and in-district visits. Like we've shown a couple of examples, sharing those photos of when you've been in the office, whether or not you met with a member of Congress, it's important to take those pictures, share with your communities the advocacy that you're engaging in and that your advocates are engaging in. And it's also just a great way to see what your community is doing. Anytime we have August recess or an in-person meeting day on Capitol Hill or a virtual meeting day on Capitol Hill, which we'll be having in a couple of weeks, having those pictures and posts and thank yous to our community is really important to keep the momentum going for our advocacy campaign.
Yeah, and then in terms of the virtual fly-in, I actually think this is even more compelling in sort of the world that we're living in now, as opposed to even, where we were a few weeks or months ago. Yep. But in general, what we've seen at Quorum, a lot of organizations using social to kind of amplify their message during fly-ins, right? Fly-ins are big events, they're expensive, and not everyone can attend. for those advocates who can't make it, giving them an outlet on social media, a voice, really allows them to participate and helps drive the momentum and impact of the event. So virtual fly-in is really just sort of an additional element to a fly-in that people can use social for, that really, again, really helps build momentum, helps push the event forward.
Absolutely. And then there are times when you don't want to use social. Social media is not appropriate for every campaign that you're going to launch. Sometimes if the ask is fairly light of either your advocate or the member of Congress, you may not want to post that on social media. Or if you don't need the public pressure, sometimes you have an internal lobbying effort that you just want to handle on one-to-one communications with a member of Congress. Maybe it's tricky or a tough policy area for you to explain publicly. That's when you might not want to use social media for advocacy campaigns. So while most of the time you do want to use social media, there are some times when it's not appropriate.
Yeah, and then what's really sort of important here is understanding the differences between platforms. While most of our policy members or policymakers are using social media, those platforms simply aren't all created equal. And so while your strategies might involve multiple platforms, it's really helpful to devise separate strategies for each one to accomplish different goals. Ashley, can you talk a little bit about how you guys have done that?
Yeah, so Twitter is really king when it comes to advocacy, and petitioning legislators to take action. Obviously, that's where they're spending most of their time. Twitter is really for for news and knowledge and kind of that inside the beltway audience most of the time. And so we want to, again, meet our members of Congress where they're spending most of their time. So using Twitter to communicate about our legislative asks and thanking members of Congress is really important for Twitter. And then Facebook, equally as important and a separate strategy for us and for most organizations, but it's where our community really lives. People living with ALS are generally between the ages of 40 and 70, and we know from a lot of Pew research that people in that older age bracket primarily use Facebook as their social media platform. And it's also just a really great community building place. It's where your friends and family are. You can share posts on social media about what's happening in your community on Facebook a little more easily. And so having those separate strategies and knowing what message is best for each platform is really important as you're crafting your advocacy campaign.
Yeah, and I think part of the strategy for using one platform or another really also relies on technical considerations. Actually, you talked about Twitter being a great place to communicate with legislators. One of the reasons that's so is because Twitter allows you to pre-populate messages to constituents, and advocates are a lot more likely to take the action if all they have to do is sort of click the button to send the message, as opposed to having to craft that message themselves. Similarly with Facebook, you talked about the community building aspect. Certainly that's true. One of the reasons for that is because the Facebook ad function allows people to sign up for newsletters and take action all without leaving the site. So not only is it a great place to take action, but it can also be a really great source for advocacy acquisition. And we've seen a lot of organizations have really low acquisition costs relative to other sources using Facebook. So again, the sort of technical differences between the two often help sort of drive the different outcomes that you're going for on either platform.
Yeah, and one of the platforms that we use that isn't on here is Instagram. Instagram is really great. It's where I spend, especially right now, a lot of my time looking at people's dogs and their kids and what's happening in their homes. It's really optimized for pretty pictures, as you all know. And so it's a great place to tell stories, and that's what we're mostly using it for. And as many of you who spend any time on Instagram know, it's not really optimized for clicking out to another page to take action. So we use Instagram to share the story of people living with ALS, how we're advocating for them at the federal and the state level, but not really focusing our CTAs, our calls to action on Instagram, just because it's not set up for that.
Mm-hmm. So Ashley, one thing we talked about is that at the end of the day, all of these strategies and actions are really designed to encourage people to take action. And the more momentum we can generate in these campaigns, the more likely it is that people will participate. Can you walk us through a little bit how ALS has built sort of momentum through a campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime we launch a campaign, we send an email to our advocate list. Anyone who is signed up in our Advocacy Action Center, either through their chapters or through our federal site, we'll send an email out to them, letting them know that we have a new action for them to do in our Advocacy Action Center. An advocate clicks the link in that email, it takes them to the Action Center. They take that action, usually a letter, sending a letter to their member of Congress, and then posting on social media, so they complete that. And then we always have a social share, like one of the examples before was that post-action social share, so that they can post about that campaign on social media to encourage their family and friends to engage and become members of our ALS advocacy community and to become an ALS advocate. And then those family and friends, they see that their family member wants them to take action in support of policy priorities, and so they click on the link and they create an account and take action in our Advocacy Action Center, and the cycle starts all over again. Those new advocates will receive an email from us the next time we have a live campaign, a new action alert for them to take, and they can join the cycle and continue that momentum to drive advocacy. So it's really important to continue to attract new advocates all the time, and to grow our communities, and using email, but also posting those advocacy actions on social media is a great way to complete that cycle time and time again. And then we also use momentum to, like I said, to turn one grassroots action into a multi-click action. So I've talked a bit about this, and you've seen this in some of the examples. Our primary action is almost always writing a letter to your member of Congress, asking them to co-sponsor a bill, to vote yes on a bill when it comes up to the floor for a vote, to support a policy position. We focus on letters because it's the easiest action for anyone to take. It's one click, but it's also the most accessible because people living with ALS have a variety of physical limitations as their disease progresses. And so having them be able to have a pre-populated template email that they can personalize and then send to their member of Congress is really helpful for them. They do that primary action, and then after they complete that action, they're taken to the next page, which is a follow-up action to tweet at their member of Congress. And like the letter, we have a template all ready to go for them to tweet. As long as they have a Twitter account or want to create a Twitter account right there, they can click tweet and it sends. And then after they've completed that follow-up tweet action, they'll be taken to a thank you page to either take the next action, to learn more about our issues, or to take them back to ALS.org, which is our home site on our website, to donate or volunteer in other ways with the organization. So that one click, that primary action really propels one person to do multiple to take multiple actions, and we want to, as long as we have someone's interest and time, we really want to capture that and make sure that each next step is easy and actionable and interesting for them to do. And the next part of talking about how to optimize your advocacy campaigns for social media is signaling your constituency with your social content. This is a formula that we use at the ALS Association for pretty much all of our Twitter actions, our follow-up tweet actions. And it says, as your constituent and someone impacted by non-invasive ventilators or ALS research, I urge the legislator to have the call to action and then use a campaign hashtag. By using this kind of formula, it's really helpful because you only have 240 characters. With a phone call or a letter, you have lots more time to signal that you are a constituent for that member of Congress. And as soon as you do that, your member of Congress will, their ears will perk up, their eyes will perk up, and they'll know that they need to really pay attention, especially in an election year, because they need those constituents to end up voting for them in November. So signaling that constituency before you even begin discussing the issue is really important to make sure that the member or the staff who are reading these tweets, reading your messages, are paying attention to what we're asking them to do.
Yeah, and this is where having the right software systems and a grassroots advocacy system can really be a big assist for your organization. It means that you can automatically send advocates the Twitter handle or other social media accounts for those legislators without requiring that your advocate find them themselves or you having to create all sorts of different segmented lists based on those things. It just makes it much, much easier on you and much easier on your advocates.
And then we also want to talk a little bit about coordinating between the advocacy and the communications teams. At the ALS Association, and I imagine many of your organizations, the advocacy team does not run the organization's social media accounts. I'm very glad that I don't have the login to our Facebook or our Twitter account, but I understand the power that comes with it. And so we work with our communications team very closely to craft a plan anytime we run a campaign. To make sure that, number one, our messages are on brand. And most of our advocacy focused messages are positive because we're asking members to take an action, we're engaging our audiences about a specific policy area, but providing them an opportunity to have an impact in that. And so by including our communications team, they can help review any of the social copy before it gets posted to make sure it's on brand for our organization. And then two, having a clear review process. It's really important to have plenty of time to go through necessary approvals, especially as urgent items pop up. It's important to have the nice to have review process or the urgent review process so that you have a plan for those rapid response moments so that you're not getting stuck internally anytime you need to respond quickly to either what's happening in Congress or what's happening in your community. And then sharing language between campaign posts and your organization's social media account. Our comms team is on Facebook and on Twitter and monitoring what our community is talking about on a daily and hourly basis. They know what's resonating with our community and what is not. And so we'll craft a draft social media post anytime we launch a new campaign. We'll draft something and we'll share it with the communications team to get their review and approval. And then if they have any edits, they send it back to us. And then if we all agree, it gets posted. And that can happen slowly or more quickly, however we need it to. But it's really important to be able to have a good relationship with your communications team and have that quick review process and that quick turnaround time to be able to make an impact, especially right now when things we're moving very quickly. A couple of weeks ago when Congress was in session and moving some big bills for us. So it's that relationship is key in any advocacy work we're doing, but especially as it comes to social media.
So Ashley, we are down to our last content slide of the day. And certainly this is one of the most critical. So when you and your team are looking at social media metrics, how do you all measure success of your campaigns?
Yeah, so we obviously measuring our success is really important for any advocacy initiative, showing that you're providing value to your community for what you're asking of them. So the acquisition of new advocates is always important. Are we engaging a larger audience? Are we bringing people in with the messages and the actions that we're providing to them is always a metric that we're looking at. The volume of posts with our hashtag, having those template tweet actions that include hashtags is really important so we can look at them. I use TweetDeck so that I'm monitoring all of our campaign hashtags in real time in order to amplify those posts, but also see what our community is talking about. Response rate from policymakers, if they're applying to our advocates posts like you saw in a previous example, if they're liking our posts or following us and sharing our information, that's really, really important. The click-through rate to campaigns is something I pay attention to as the crafter of many of our campaigns. So if they're receiving the email or they're seeing our posts on social media, are they clicking through? And one great tool that I've been using recently through Quorum is adding a source code at the end of any of our action URLs. So I can put it, the magic links and the emails are great on social media. We include a source code for those so that we can see this person came in through an action we posted on Facebook, or this person came in and took an action through Twitter. It's really helpful to us to see those sources of where our advocates are taking action, how they're clicking through our posts, so that we can tweak any of how we're approaching our social media work. Maybe we need to post more on Facebook than we are doing. So that's really helpful. And then at the end of the day, it's really how many legislators are we targeting? Do they see those messages? Are the offices responsive? Are we getting that legislative reach? And then ultimately, those legislative successes, are we at any action we're doing, the goal of any campaign, online or offline, is making sure that the members of Congress are doing the thing that we've asked them to do. So voting in a particular way, co-sponsoring and supporting a bill in a specific way. And if they're not doing that, then we need to tweak how we're communicating and engaging our advocates. So it's always great to see after an in-person fly-in, a virtual fly-in, those co-sponsorship numbers cropping up on congress.gov and in Quorum. And then obviously if they're voting on a bill, their votes in the way that we want them to. So that's always, our ultimate goal is always that legislative success, but all of these other KPIs are really important to talk about your metrics of success, not only for your external audience, talking about how many letters you sent, how many members of Congress support the issues that we're working on, but also internally measuring success for your team and for your internal audiences so that you can show the value of doing this work on social media.
Yeah, and here again, having the right software tools will make this much easier for you. Social media tracking can be really hard, especially if someone is responding to a constituent directly, or maybe they're not using your hashtag or the language necessarily that you had hoped that they would use. And so having a system, for example, like Quorum, which allows you to set up keyword searches and a much sort of broader set of searches, so you're alerted to those. That makes it a lot easier. TweetDeck, for example, can do similar things with hashtags and dashboards. But again, instead of having to use 4 or 5 different systems, having a single system where you're tracking all of your metrics makes it a lot easier for you to kind of see what's going on and understand the efficacy of your campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't have seen that example between Congressman Davis and one of our advocates if we didn't have an alert set up in Quorum. It might have just like passed us by in the stream on TweetDeck. And so having those alerts through Quorum is incredibly helpful for us as we're tracking how members of Congress are not only engaging, but anytime they're saying they're have ALS in a tweet or a Facebook post, we're getting an alert about that. So it's a really great way to seeing how our advocacy is resonating on Capitol Hill.
And then just sort of one final note from me, the material and strategies and insight that Ashley and I have gone through this afternoon, these are exactly the kind of things that our customer success team at Quorum helps our clients with. We really take a deep dive into our clients' goals, what they're trying to achieve, the systems that they're using to make sure that we're aligning kind of their success to our own. And so we would certainly love an opportunity to chat with anyone on the line today about how we could potentially help you with your advocacy goals. We'll be sending out the slides to everyone, and there'll be a really easy way if anyone wants to get in touch with either me personally to hear about kind of how our customer success program works, or even just to learn more about the Quorum software. We'll make that really easy for you to do. And then Satya, I think we're ready for some more Q&A. I know I saw a lot of really good questions come in, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump into a few of the questions that I saw. Actually, I think a lot of these are really kind of directed to you. One of the questions that I saw come in a few times was around whether people should be using personal accounts to send messages. They should be using their corporate accounts. They should be using a personal corporate account. Ashley, what's your kind of experience and recommendation here?
So any organizational or company messages, anything that you want to send to your community following those accounts, you want to use your corporate account, obviously, but I use my personal account a lot to amplify to my own community to the activities that we're doing in work, just like I would on Facebook or Twitter and Instagram. I share what I'm doing at work in my personal life on social media. So it's really up to you. The comfort level of each person on social media is different. I've been using it since day one. I moved to DC about 12 years ago. I'm dating myself, but so I've been around since social media really became a hot thing in DC and in advocacy. And so I find it's really, in order for me to understand how our advocates are engaging with these platforms, I feel like I need to be engaging in them in a similar way. So the only way to do that is to get comfortable and use social media, but it's up to each person, really.
Mm-hmm. There was a really good question that I saw come in around how all of this might apply for at sort of the state level as opposed to the federal level, and how things might be different, how our strategies might be different. From our side, and Ash, I'll let you go in a second. From our side, what we've seen, really organizations make sure they have not just a social media strategy, but frankly, sort of a broad digital strategy for states, simply because things at the state level happen faster. Things change a lot faster. Things move through the system much, much faster than they do at the federal level. So being responsive to that and having every asset available to you, from social media, from what legislators or policy members might be saying, to new alerts that are going up on state websites, to anything else that you're hearing, having like all of the sort of listening channels available to you is almost more important, I think, at the state level as at the federal level, because simply things happen that much faster. So again, we really look at it as a broader digital strategy at the state level, where social really is important there too. Absolutely.
Yeah, and for state legislators and legislators, it's important to engage with them, have a offline strategy and an online digital strategy, because their sessions are much more condensed, which is why things move faster. They may only be in session 4 or 5 months of the year, or every other year, like Texas. And so it's really important to make sure that as you're going into those state legislative sessions, to have a clear strategy about how you're going to go about your legislative work is really important. But for legislators at the state level, they've adopted social media a little more slowly than their federal counterparts. And if anyone has gone to a state legislative website recently, you'll see why, because many of those state legislative websites look like they're a couple years behind the times, and so they're also just not. This isn't their main job. A lot of state legislators, they do this job in conjunction with their real life job. They're lawyers, they're doctors, they're farmers, and so they may not be as engaged on social media as their federal counterparts, just because that's not where they're spending their time. And so, oops, we have a kid.
Again.
So yeah, so it's harder to reach those state legislators in social media, but it's still important to do that work, because we are seeing with a generational shift at the state level that more state legislators are being more savvy on social media, and so you can't discount that. You have to include it in your strategy. We live real lives here.
I think a lot of people on the line hopefully sympathize with a little 4-year-old walking in. Yeah, actually, I saw a question I thought was really interesting, and this is us looking through the crystal ball, but with the sort of pandemic that we're living in right now, what do we think the post-pandemic world looks like with social media?
I think anytime there's a big thing happening globally, we've seen a growth in social media, and so I think we're continuing to see that as we're quarantined and we're staying inside more and more. People need to connect with their communities in different ways, and one of those ways is on social media. All of my family lives elsewhere. They're in Texas and they're in Arizona, and so social media has been a really big part of my personal life and connecting with our families, but also professional life. We need to meet people where they are. We may not be able to fly in people to Washington, D.C., but we can still have an impact in the policy process virtually. So making sure that we're posting on social media, that we're educating our audiences where they're spending their time on email, on social media, and really using those communications tools in a productive and engaging way is really important. So I think now more than ever, new folks are joining social media, whether they're family or friends, making sure that they're following pages that may be of interest to them, helping them set up their own accounts is really helpful. I did that for my own dad, and he's using it for news these days. So I think anytime anything big happens in the world, social media grows and grows. And I think it'll be that way in this case as well.
Yeah. There was a question that came in that really reminded me of sort of my days in email marketing. And the question was around the balance of communicating too much or too often.
Yep.
And how do you find the balance of not only doing things like thanking people online, right, which is important, but maybe not particularly interesting at times, right, with the things that cut through the noise that are really dramatic. So how do you find that balance between too much, not enough, interesting versus less interesting?
I think it's really understanding the platforms. So I think we've talked about this a little bit. For Twitter, it's a much more fast-paced environment. A tweet only lives for a couple of seconds, if that, these days, which is unfortunate because even though we have 240 characters these days, it still takes a lot of time to craft each of those tweets. So making sure that you're posting more often on Twitter is important so that your messages aren't being lost in the shuffle of the fast-paced Twitter feed. Whereas for Facebook, a post may last for a full month. You may post today about a virtual event you're having, and someone a month from now might see it and kind of get frustrated that they missed that opportunity. So making sure that you're using an ad strategy to really reach the audiences when and how you need them to see your messages, but also understanding the pace of each of the platforms is really important. And I know at the beginning of this pandemic, a lot of organizations, especially in the nonprofit space, either put the pedal to the metal and really went for it with their messaging, and especially on email. And some folks backed off because they didn't want to overwhelm their audiences. And so I think it's really understanding your audience. And at the ALS Association, ALS is not going to stop. Someone living with ALS, the progression of their disease is not going to stop because of coronavirus and being quarantined. They're still going to continue to have ALS. And unfortunately, it's still a death sentence. And so we really wanted to make sure that we're still engaging our audiences in a thoughtful and proactive way, giving them opportunities that are really going to make an impact in the policy process, but also in their lives. So as these stimulus packages have popped up, we're looking at our 2020 policy priorities that we crafted in a pre-COVID environment, and are finding ways that we can ask Congress to include those priorities in any of the stimulus bills that are moving, or reframing those policy priorities given COVID-19 and the pandemic we're all living in. And one of those, the SMART Act, because of the pandemic, the Medicare program, which was really the program that was harming access to non-invasive ventilators for people living with ALS, they stopped, they took the action we wanted them to do a year ago, and removed non-invasive ventilators from a bidding program that would have hurt access to those ventilators. And so we had a win legislatively or regulatorily on that issue. And so we want to share that win with our community because it's really big news. They've been working on that both at a regulatory and a legislative level for a year now. And so we wanted to share that good news with them, that the access to these ventilators aren't going to be compromised because of COVID-19. So it's really just knowing each platform and knowing your audience. I think those two things are really important any time of year, but most importantly when there's a big breaking news situation or a big societal change that your organization's dealing with. So.
Actually, we had a question come in that is a bit tangential to the topic that we've been going through today, but I think it's actually really interesting. And it goes to the idea on the internet, one of the biggest themes, and especially in social, is this idea of influencers. So I'm curious if the ALS has developed a way of, or how do you guys think about identifying influencers within your advocate base, right? Not necessarily like policy members, but influence within your policy, your advocacy base, and then how you might be engaging those influencers to then help make a difference on behalf of the organization.
Yeah, so a lot of those folks self-identify. I think this is the same for a lot of organizations, especially nonprofits. Some of our board members are our biggest influencers, and so engaging your internal audiences, your board of trustees, your board of directors, making sure that they're engaging in your advocacy and highlighting the folks, the influencers, the grass tops, as we would say in the advocacy world, when they're self-identifying is really important. Not overloading them, but also engaging them as needed, but also making sure that you're following your comments and your shares and your likes on your social media posts. If you're seeing someone time and time again sharing a post or commenting on a post in a productive way, in a positive way, or liking something, engage with them. Send them a DM if that's appropriate for your organization and how you communicate, and see if there are other ways that you can be amplifying their story. And a lot of our best influencers, of course, are people living with ALS and caregivers and family members who have had people pass away from the disease. And so we want to make sure that we're providing that opportunity to always put the patient's voice first in anything that we're doing, because at the end of the day, everything is mission-based. Everything is focused on improving the lives of people living with ALS and to defeating this horrendous disease. So we really just, you have to kind of just pay attention to what's happening on social media, and that's where having a good relationship with your communications team is helpful, because they're seeing the DMs come through, they're seeing the likes and the comments come through, and so they can really identify, oh, we have a new person who's liking and sharing everything we're doing on Facebook, and is really active. Let's see how we can we capture their story on video and share it over social media that way, why they became engaged in this organic way. So it's really just paying attention to your audience, and paying attention to your hashtags, who's using your hashtags the most. That's really great ways to find influencers in this advocacy space.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've had a ton of really good questions, and I apologize, we won't be able to get to all of them. I do want to be conscious of time. I know many of you probably have meetings that start in about 3 minutes, and so we want to make sure that you've got time to get to those. So as I said, we will send out material after this presentation today. If there's any additional questions anyone would like answered, please feel free to respond to that. My contact information will be in that information. I'm more than happy to jump on the phone with anyone or just to chat over email. These are the kind of things that sort of Ashley and I love to do all the time, and would love to chat with anyone else. So thank you all again so very much for spending the last hour with us. We really appreciate, we know how valuable your time is and how many things you have going on. So again, thank you so much, and we hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Like Andrew mentioned, thank you all for jumping on the line today. We do have these slides available to send out to everyone. We do ask that you take this poll I've just launched to indicate that you're interested in receiving the slides. And we'll make sure someone reaches out with a copy of them for you.
Again, thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.